Okay, so I wasn't gonna do this because I'm just sitting outside, doing a little exfoliation, got the charcoal mask, have a little smoke, about top of the shower, get on with my day. But honestly, today has been this impactful day of memory. I've been listening to a little bit of a random chapter from Jordan Peterson's book, his first book, about meaning and the pursuit of meaning over the pursuit of what is expedient. And earlier this week, I went to a physiotherapy session, and it's psychosomatic physiotherapy, right? So you think, oh, physical, okay, where's your injury? And it's like, well, I'm carrying things around, that are based on old trauma. So in this session, by the way, very great physiotherapist. She's very excellent at what she does. She basically was able to get me to go through multiple traumatic, and she didn't do this. She just created a space for it to happen, right? She created a space. She's like, oh, there's some sort of bump on your leg or bump on your foot, or there's something's off, right? What's coming up for you as I work on it. And I was bringing up all these old things. And then today I was cleaning my espresso machine, and honestly, I started crying. I was going back to these moments in 2008 when I left the seminary, and I had no idea who I was, and the only identity I had been carrying was this: I'm a seminarian who will become a priest, who will have a meaningful life and a big impact. And that was taken away from me in this cruel fashion for the second time. Once in 2006, I was sent home from the seminary with a breaking of internal forum. I have another video on that. Second time was this dark, hey, if you ever, masturbate again, literally, if you masturbate again, you will not continue in the seminary, right? And so this was happening, and I was remembering these things, right? I was like, oh my God, I remember getting out of the seminary. I remember coming home to Marythorpe. I remember, no one being able to connect with me. There was such a disconnect with myself, because I didn't know who I was. And I had been I had sort of been punished for who I was, if that makes sense, right? So maybe my slightly elevated sexuality was actually something that betrays a deeper energy. I have more energy than other people. I have bipolar too, right? And my psychiatrist always tells me that my healthiest personality is actually a little close to hypomania. Not quite hypomania, but very close. He's like, that's your elevation. And I've been told, hey, you're a center of influence. I think that stuff ties to having this higher sexual energy over the years. So now that sexual energy was told, instead of giving it away to be used, maybe besides just masturbation, right? There's other ways that we can there's this idea of transmutation, all this stuff, but this energy can be used to create and connect. And I used it to create and connect, mostly to connect my entire life. But here I am leaving the seminary. 3 months after the seminary, guess what happens? So I start developing a friendship with someone in my small town where I grew up, and that turns into a relationship with her. And I was thinking today about how much that relationship developed because of connection, and how much I was so disconnected from my family. I was disconnected from my church community. I was disconnected from all of my friends because my friends were in the seminary. And I got home and I started having a relationship, a sexual relationship with someone 3 months after I was in the seminary. And I still remember my friends' reactions to that, right? They don't know what to do with that, because now Mike was this seminarian guy and now he's living this other life. And I remembered today getting, by the way, this has something to do with sobriety, so stick with me. Again, I know I did the charcoal thing. I'm not just showing off my weight loss the last few months. I just really want to do this in the moment because I cried so hard today. And so then basically I got kicked out of my family's home. So I was living at home. I was working a job in our small town in Marythorpe, and I got kicked out. And I still remember my dad, he was so sad and he kicked me out. Just because they weren't down with me having this relationship with this woman, right? Which is their right. I mean, I was 21, 22 years old, okay? But I got kicked out. So now that leads to I had to get a place. I ended up getting a place, and then I tried to find jobs. All the while, my only connection was like this person, right? And then that leads, like in 2008, leads me through 2009. I moved to Kamloops briefly, and this ties to another idea that I've had a lot, which is, hey, if you change your physical environment, everything else will change, right? Like, it's just, you're living in Mayerthorpe, you need to move to Kamloops. So I moved to Kamloops, and actually now, I didn't even realize this. Sorry, there's an ambulance going by, so bear with me. But I'm just realizing this now. I couldn't have told you what happened in Kamloops till now. I had one of my first depression episodes. So I was working at the Earls. I was living with my good friend, Zach Panette. He's a friggin' great guy. And I was getting tons of connection. He was one of the great, probably, he's the greatest roommate I ever had. We used to have a great time together, great connection, really solid guy. Another guy lived there briefly, Sean Corrigan, Zach's friend Adam, brother-in-law Adam. We used to connect and have these great, hilarious conversations that just wouldn't end in terms of humor. But I got depressed, so depressed. And who was there for me when I got depressed? Well, this woman back in Mayerthorpe. And so I ended up coming home from Kamloops, and I ended up living at her house. And we were together for a little while there. But then diabetes comes into play, right? So if you're following the traumatic story, and again, I didn't plan this with the charcoal mask. It's just I've been meaning to do this for a few days, and then I did it, and then I was crying in the kitchen because of all these memories in my mind. And so my diabetes comes into play, right? Now I still remember, like, I got type 1 diabetes, and if you know what diabetes is like, it's like, okay, so previous to now, you've been eating food when you're hungry, maybe too much of it, and that's about it. Okay, great. Now you must count every single carbohydrate that's in your food. You must account for your activity every day, and not just every day, like at the end of the day, here's my activity. No, you must account for the timing and the intensity so that you can take insulin shots. And by the way, here's all these needles, and here's all these little bottles of insulin that you have to use, right? And so I'm thinking of all the trauma that's occurring to me, right? Because now I get diabetes, 2009, on my mom's birthday. I went to the hospital. My blood sugar was 50, right? So most of you will occasionally hit 8 if you don't have diabetes. I was just at my dietitian this week, and she showed me the graph of a normal person. The normal person was wearing a sensor, just like I have the sensor. Woo! There you go, the Libra sensor. And a normal person will go up to 8 if they have a big sugary meal, right? But I was at 50, and I was in the hospital. My mom, I couldn't quench my thirst. That's why I ended up in the hospital. I was always drinking water, and then I was drinking those Tetra Packs, those 1 liter juice Tetra Packs, like Sunripe and whatever. I was drinking, I would guzzle those. I wasn't really drinking much booze at this point, but I would throw up. And I would throw up just because I was trying to quench my thirst, and I couldn't quench it. Which is an interesting analogy for me trying to quench my thirst for connection. Because I couldn't quench that either. I didn't know where to turn. I didn't have sources. I didn't have, There's a good friend in the story here. His name's Andy Sear. He's still my friend. He's a good guy. Andy, it was recently your birthday, and I didn't call you. I saw it on Facebook. Sorry about that. You were a good dude in a couple spots. Very good friend in a couple, especially in this era of my life. I really needed that friend. And then in my addiction journey in 2016, he had a good call with me. But anyway, back to me, right? Back to the story of I was trying to quench my thirst. Maybe I was trying to quench my connection. So I get type 1 diabetes. And so now here's where the story continues into my gambling, right? I had to come into Edmonton for a 1-day diabetes education course at the Royal Alec. And I still remember what happened. I came in, oh man, this gets deeper. I forgot about this too. So I came in, right? And I'm at the Royal Alec, and most of the people there are 60 plus. And then there's me, right? Because it's generalized for type 1 and type 2 diabetes. And so I'm at this thing completely lost. The nurses are explaining things to me and how diabetes will affect me and how to manage everything. And this was also the same day that I gambled. So I played blackjack once at a casino near Mayerthorpe, and I won. And I didn't really love blackjack. It didn't do anything for me. This was the first time I played poker. So I go in and play poker. The same day that I'm at this all-day course, completely disconnected from the fact that I have type 1 diabetes, no idea what's going on, completely just like traumatized by the whole experience. You're taking 5 needles a day. You're just like, this is overwhelming. I don't understand what to do, right? And I went and played cards, and I think I had $100 or $200. And I still remember, I can remember sitting there. I remember the guy to my left. I remember the dealer. I almost remember his name. And I got 2 aces. Okay, so if you don't know poker, the best, or Texas Hold'em, the best possible hand is 2 aces. The best starting hand. It's not the best possible hand at the end, but it's the best starting hand. And the best possible scenario if you have 2 aces is usually that someone else has 2 kings. Why is this the best possible scenario? Because you can put all your chips in and they think that 99% of the time they have the best hand and they'll call you. So you'd think it would be better if they had a way weaker hand like 2-7, but they'll never call your bet. So I went all in, he calls, and my aces held up. And this reminded me today of how certain drugs have such an intense hit the first time you use them. Right? So I won the first time I gambled at poker. So how was that seared into my mind? Because, I don't know how long I'm going to go on this. The charcoal mask is going to dry up pretty quick. But the trauma of that connected on the same day with my diabetic course at the Royal Alec. It was the exact same day, and I drove back to Mayerthorpe. And what would start happening is I would start driving to Edmonton to gamble. So I would work, I would get off work, drive to Edmonton to gamble, get home at like, who knows, 3, 4, 5 in the morning. I used to sometimes not sleep, and this was before drugs. For me, I wasn't using drugs at all, right? I was drinking a bit, but I wasn't even drinking and driving. Like, I was drinking just a bit here and there. I wasn't at the casino drinking. I was gambling and losing myself and searching for meaningful connections. And I was getting the type of connections at the casino, okay, that are so good that they almost work. It's an expression from Gabor Mate's book. They're so good that they almost work. It's just like cocaine. It's just like alcohol. It's just like if you have a food addiction or eating disorder, whatever. Anything that is driving you like that, you get enough of it that it almost works, right? Like alcohol almost works, usually for what you want it to accomplish. It just almost works each time, and then it doesn't. And this is the same as this experience I had of gambling. So where are we going with this? Well, I can't take too long on this story. Like, this could go deep. Had a lot of tears today. I know I look super weird, but we're trying to exfoliate what we smoke to try to neutralize our decision making. So, but this is really a memory of how deep my diabetes has this traumatic event. So arguably diabetes shows up in my life from all the trauma, right? Like I have the depression, I have the exiting the seminary, I have my family like didn't know what to do with me. So I don't blame. There's no blame in I don't want there to be blame on the seminary, blame on the girl that I met and the relationship we had. No blame on my family, but I have dark memories of living in Mayerthorpe and I think needing food or needing something from my parents, probably food because my gambling, right? And walking across town knowing that they would have been at church and sitting on their steps. And it would have been like, church is probably at 9, so like I'm there at like 10, I need to talk to them. And I still remember my mom and dad, and my mom not being able to deal with me, right? And which was really just her not knowing how to handle her emotions, because here's her son, right? Sitting on her doorstep, living in the same town. She can't spend much time with him because he's just so broken. She doesn't know what to do, because it probably stirs up all these emotions in her that are hard for her to deal with. And I remember my dad like being the one to kind of communicate with me and talk and say, well, you can't stay. And so when I thought of this story earlier, I started bawling inside. I was just like, what would that have made younger Michael from 15 years ago feel like, that he can't go to his mom and dad, right? And that's not a blame on mom and dad. That's a memory of an experience that would have traumatized me. And my mom, it's funny, after I went to rehab in 2017 for 3 weeks. She drops me off at rehab, and she picked me up 3 weeks later. And I'll never forget, she picks me up and suddenly starts talking about the 12 steps. And as you know, I've been to a few AA meetings, but I haven't really done the formalized program. But my mom hopped into Al-Anon, right? Which was a beautiful step she made. So her son goes to rehab, she hops into Al-Anon. And I remember thinking, Mom, like, I've been in a formalized, intense rehab, and you're like rehabbing faster than me. Like, what are you trying to do here? You know? And that was one of the great moments of my mom's life, where she was able to really make some significant changes. I still remember she had this meeting every Thursday, and it meant a lot to her. She had a sponsor lady she worked with. The reason I'm telling you that is because she sat me down at home. We were in our house in Mayerthorpe. I still remember it was like the grand piano. I can picture everything. And she apologized to me. She's like, "Hey, Michael, when you were in your addictions, when you were gambling, I rejected you that day." And I remembered that day today, just thinking about how my diabetes probably showed up through trauma in my life. Anyway, I gotta go get this charcoal off my face. But I'm just remembering the gambling, the feeling of just not knowing what and here's a question, right? If I could go back to Michael in 2008, being rejected from the seminary, and when he was leaving the seminary, you know, what would I tell Michael? What would I write a letter? I'm going to do this, by the way, write some letters to my younger self and say, other people cannot tell you who you are. No one tells you your identity. Do not let other people define your identity. Do not let other people define you and tell you what you can and can't do, and who you are and who you aren't. You know? And probably it's something like, you're safe, you're worthy, and you're going to do big things. Those are some of the things I would tell young Michael in 2008. So I have a lot more of this story of how diabetes would drive my addictions. Even up into rehab, I went into an emergency state. Like, I had ketoacidosis in a rehab surrounded by nurses. How is that even possible, right? And it happened because they messed with my insulin. But I'm just remembering the impact of 2008, 9, and 10 on me. And my mom, you know, because I remember this moment where she couldn't communicate with me. She didn't know how to communicate with her son. He was too disconnected. And all the things she would proceed to go through up until today, where she has married this new awesome guy from America. She's my hero in a lot of ways. She's one of my heroes. She's a great hero in my life. I'm realizing, not to take away from that statement, but I'm realizing that I'm my hero. And that's kind of powerful to understand, the things that you go through, and then here you are. So, those are my random thoughts. Enjoy your long weekend. And sobriety can be sustained and understood through the idea of, or through the filter, or through the retroactive understanding of trauma. Because if you could understand addiction and what you're getting from addiction, because I was getting something from gambling, I was getting something from drinking, I was getting something from playing, from cocaine, I was getting a lot from all of that. Actually, I got some great things from those addictions, but they just were something that I got just enough of that it almost worked. And sobriety has given me more than enough of me. Cheers. Sober, open mic.